Hello, my name is Rich Howard, owner of Architectural Builders Supply. In this video is to bring you a closer look at the Bommer number BB5000-450-600. This is a ball bearing, 5-knuckle, full mortise, steel base, standard weight hinge in a 4.5 by 4.5 inch size. And they are sold as each, and I'm going to go over one of those hinges with you right now. And we will also go over that part number. So this is a Bommer BB5000. So what that means is, because it is a standard weight hinge, meaning it's 134 thousandths. Let's check that first. Caliper is telling me 0.136. That means that it is a standard weight hinge, 134 thousandths, meaning it's not heavyweight, which would be 180 thousandths in a 4.5 inch height. It means that it has 2 bearing packets rather than 4. So a standard weight will have 2 bearing packets that you see here and here. It is a full mortise hinge. You can see from the swag on the hinge leaf here that when the leaves are brought parallel, they're meant to be mortised flush to the edge of the door and frame. And that swag is really the angle right here, okay, where that hinge leaf has been bent, or how it's been bent, right there. It also means that this is a steel base hinge that is part of the number 5000. Okay. Actually, I'd like to tell you what each of the values are. So backing up just a bit, BB means ball bearing. The first 5, or the 5 I should say, means 5-knuckle. You can see why we would call it 5-knuckle. There's 5 knuckles in this hinge. The 0, the first 0, means full mortise. We discussed that. The second 0 means that it is a standard hinge rather than it being some variant of a hinge like you might have as a raised barrel, or possibly a wide throw or a slip-in, some sort of special variant of a hinge. Then the last 0 in the part number there means that it is both standard weight and made of steel. Okay. Now, -450, that's the size. This is a 4.5 inch tall by 4.5 inch wide hinge. It's important to know that the height is the first dimension on this hinge. And that's important because you need to know which is which. What is the first dimension? What is the second dimension? That is crucial because not all hinges would be square like this. You can have 4 by 6. You could have 5 by 4.5. So it's important to know height is the first dimension, width is the second dimension on a hinge like this. That is important for us to know as it relates to how you're going to prep your door and frame. If you were dealing with a hinge that was, very commonly you're going to have 4.5 by 4. That's a very common size. Well, you would sure want to be positive that you are prepping 4.5 tall rather than 4 inch tall. The reason I say that is because doors are the opposite logic. The first dimension is the width. On a hinge, the first dimension is the height. So it's important to know that for many reasons. And without devolving into a conversation about why the height and the width are important in their own right. I think it's just important enough to say that this is a 450, which means 4.5 by 4.5, and most importantly, of course, height is the first dimension. Now after that, we have the number 600. That means prime coat, and by Bommer, it means this sort of beige color. The 600 also means that it is made of steel again. So it's the 600 also tells us made of steel in a prime coat finish. Okay. Now this hinge does not have any special features on it like security pin or security features. It doesn't have radiused corners or ball tips. This is just going to probably be a hinge that will, operate in an interior setting. Clearly, I would think the client's going to paint this hinge. It could be also an exterior door that is in swing, is where you might see this. And I say in swing because, again, there's no security feature on the hinge at all. Now let's switch to the screen view where we can take a look at the Bommer catalog. Okay, so this is the item that we're looking at. the BB5000, 450, and a 600 finish. So first of all, let's talk about the different finishes that are available from Bommer. And that's a fairly long, that's a very long list. The bottom line is Bommer has their own plating plant in a separate physical location from their manufacturing plant, and I just, it's, for no reason other than the original plant couldn't house a plating facility. So their plating facility is down the road, 20 minutes or so. They very proudly state that they can do about 33 different finishes. That's different finishes for base materials as well, but we're dealing with a steel-based hinge, which means anything that can be plated or etc. over steel can almost technically be done by Bommer. They have the entire facility for doing it. Fun fact about their plating facility is that the wastewater that they put back into their community, their waste, is cleaner. Their plating plant is so efficient. What they eject after their plating process is actually cleaner than the municipal water supply. And their municipal water supply is completely perfect, healthy, standard tap water. And that's another fact that they're quite proud of. So you can do 600 for prime coat, 601 for bright black japanned, 632 is polished brass, 633 is satin brass, 633 is a blackened brass, think antique brass. 639 is satin bronze, 640 is oil rub bronze, 643 is a antique bronze, which I don't hardly ever see. 646 is satin nickel, 647 is an antique nickel, 651 polished chrome, 652 satin chrome. Okay, now we just named, let's say, 12 finishes, far short of 33, but we need to change the base material. Now, when we go into brass or bronze, we're talking about a whole nother set of finishes. We go into stainless steel, we've got a couple of other finishes there, and you put them all together, and you're on the doorstep of everything that can be done. So anyway, a little fun fact about that. Sold as each, that's an important thing to know. Hinges, almost all hinges, certainly commercial hinges, are priced and sold per hinge. Ball bearing, 5-knuckle, full mortise, standard style, standard weight. There's your size, there's your finish. Now this has a non-rising removable pin as standard. Non-rising basically means that when you seat the pin and then you operate the door for untold number of cycles, the pin isn't going to creep up. You'll notice in a residential application where your hinge pin continues to kind of just continue to lift up and out. And that process, at least to me, is not, I think of extruding, where you're pushing molten aluminum through a die set. Well, with those hinge leaves acting against each other, the knuckles, it forces that pin up and out. Well, a non-rising pin like Bommer's pin design has a feature to the barrel, the circumference of the barrel underneath the head, where after you seat it, it has score marks or knurling that's done to it that really prevents it from rising. And they don't, is the bottom line. And you do certainly want that. That feature really should be done on all hinges, because without that, pins are going to creep up. That's just the bottom line. Even hinges with threaded in decorative tips that pin inside of there will, with time, work that threaded in decorative tip loose, even with thread lock, although that helps substantially. And that decorative tip will fall out, it'll hit the floor, you'll hear it, but you won't know what happened, and then that pin will slowly rise out. So that's what that means. There is a cut sheet here. That cut sheet is really a technical drawing. This is a template, okay? This is a template for a template hinge, and the term template refers to not only this document that we're looking at, but specifically the precise and exact location of the screws. This is the template location for a 4.5-inch tall hinge. So every hinge manufacturer that makes a 4.5-inch hinge to the template location or it's a template hinge will share these identical locations, these exact locations. So if you buy a frame from brand X who makes their hinge plates for template hinges, you can buy, which they do, you can buy anyone's template hinge, making your ability to choose what manufacturer you want to work with, it gives you a substantial amount of freedom. What I'm saying is, imagine if the manufacturer of the frames or doors that you were using had their own funny little scenario in terms of where those holes were located. And many, and I think all residential manufacturers do, that locks you into their hinge. That is not in your best interest. So all commercial manufacturers will offer a template pattern because it's an industry standard. The A dimension is what's important here. That's the swag line. It's the length of the leaf before the bend starts. It's the edge of the leaf to the swag line. And on our 4.5, it's 1 7/8, as you can see here. Then we get into wide throw hinges, and that's where the dimensions are put in a different row because the part number would change when we go to a wide throw. That position right here is where the standard hinge was. Well, a wide throw wouldn't be considered standard, it'd be considered wide throw. Then you can see how the part number changes as your base material changes as well. Okay, neat. Now let's switch back to the camera view and conclude this video. Okay, so a couple of other final things. First of all, in terms of the size availability of this hinge, they're going to be able to make a BB5000 in a 3.5, a 4, a 4.5, a 5, probably up to 6. I don't think they will go past 6 inch. In terms of the width, 3.5, 4, 4.5, 5, 6, 7, 8. They'll do in the width. And when it comes to the width, you want to scrutinize what is the best, overall application of width of hinge. 4.5 by 4.5 is the Swiss Army knife of hinges. It works in practically all instances. It's also, and that's true, it's also true to say that it's probably not always the best choice, that there's sometimes a better choice. You should be selecting the height of the hinge so that it meets the requirements of the opening, but the width should be scrutinized as closely as well. If you have an application where you're wrapping over a wall, typical knockdown hollow metal frame, partition wall, 4.5 inch wide is not the right hinge to use. 4 inch would be the right hinge to use. If you have some of that same application, but you have now chair rail or some sort of molding or casing that has to be calculated, 4 inch is probably not the right hinge to use. 4.5 might not be correct either. You want to move that vertical line of that vertical axis of pivoting as close to the center of the thickness of the door as possible to give the hinge the best sort of opportunity to conduct the job that you're asking it to undergo. And that's why width needs to be scrutinized. There's a simple formula for determining the width of a hinge, and it's basically the door thickness minus backset, and backset is the amount of the door that is not occupied by the leaf of the hinge. In an 1 3/4 door, it's usually a 1/4 inch. So door thickness minus backset times 2. So as we're following along, 1 3/4 minus 1/4 times 2 is 3 inch, plus any clearance that you have, the dimension from the face of the frame to the face of the door when the door is swung to 180 degrees. What does that dimension need to be? What's in there that you need to account for? In this case, there's nothing there. It's 0. Then you add any inset, and the inset is the amount that the door is moved into the frame. And in a typical hollow metal frame, it's going to be like 3/32 of an inch. Aluminum can be 0, or it can be about 1/8 of an inch. You can have a wood door and a wood frame where that inset is 7 inches. It all depends. So door thickness minus backset times 2, plus your clearance, plus your inset. Then go to the next largest width that's commercially available, and that's the best size to use. Now this hinge is going to include all machine screws and all wood screws, or at least this order does. Don't count on the factory sending the correct screws. Indicate in the comment field what fasteners you want. If you're ordering an 8x8 hinge, or and I sold a mess of those last year, would there be any need to include machine screws? I'm going to probably say no, but who knows? Maybe you're putting it down to a piece of channel iron. More realistically, we had a client who did some 6x6 hinges, and unbelievably, the manufacturer sent half wood and all machine screws. And when you go to the manufacturer's published catalog, that's their standard. That's what they're going to send, unless you basically ask them or direct them, here's the makeup of the screws that I want. In a 6x6 hinge, that's a head scratcher. Why would you, if I was going to send anything, it would be all wood screws and half machine screws. But clarify that, because, this client called on a Saturday, solid bronze hinges and an oil rub finish and he was short 12 wood screws. That's just not sitting on the shelf. So indicate that. These hinges are also going to include shims. These shims, these pieces of cardboard, they're also used to separate the leaves when they ship from the factory, okay, to keep them from being scratched a little bit. But they're also just simply shims that will allow you to move your door in the opening to suit the requirements. These are made of cardboard. These are expressly not permissible for use on fire-rated doors. If you have fire doors and you need to shim them, you must use steel shims. We sell those as well. As the old saying goes, if you're going to use cardboard to shim a fire door, use your competitor's business card. All kidding aside, the hinge is also thoroughly permissible for use on fire-rated doors. While it doesn't bear a visual label on the door, on the hinge, it doesn't have to. But rest assured that if you were to review with the manufacturer, they would be able to provide you certifications that this actual BB5000 has been tested and is approved for use on fire doors. I do understand, I've been in classes and I've heard instructors say there does appear to be a movement of having the label, that the hinge is actually going to be labeled. There's two terms, labeled and listed. The hinge is certainly listed, meaning that it has been tested and there is a listing on file with the testing laboratory and the manufacturer. But there is a movement where these same hinges are now being labeled. So they're all listed if it's been tested and passed. These hinges don't have to be labeled, but there are manufacturers, I've seen at least one that I can think of recently that is labeling their hinge as such with a UL stamp, etc. I'm not one for having excessive corporate advertising on my hinge. Some manufacturers' logos, in my opinion, get a little out of hand. I do like the Bommer logo a lot, obviously. And the reason they put that made in USA above that, and it's because this is domestically manufactured. Not only is the hinge made here, but all of the components that go into it are also domestically manufactured. The paint, the steel bearings, the steel itself. That's a fact that Bommer is quite proud of, as am I to represent them. And in fact, they're the only manufacturer of hinges that can make that claim. There are other manufacturers that have their logo and then USA under it. It doesn't mean it's manufactured in the United States. It may be, it just doesn't mean that it is. Bommer is the only manufacturer that will make that claim. Maybe that's important to you, maybe it doesn't matter. To me, it does matter, and to me it is important, and I'm proud to represent them. If you have any questions on the Bommer BB5000 hinge or any other Bommer product, please feel free to reach out to us. I would encourage you to take a deep dive into their catalog. The manufacturer's page that is linked to down below will show you not only all the Bommer products that we sell, but also a link to the manufacturer's website and that full product catalog. It was in about 1877, maybe 1876, where the two brothers, Bommer brothers, formed Bommer and invented the spring hinge. And Bommer is the company responsible for that double-acting spring hinge, for single-acting spring hinges as well. You will, if you were to look in late 19th century catalogs, early 20th century catalogs, you will literally see names that you'll know in the industry that are still alive and well today with pages of Bommer spring hinges in there. Because, you know, they wanted to offer their clients spring hinges, and Bommer was the company who was making them. So they took that copy and put it into their catalog. Bommer is by no means the only company that makes spring hinges, but they are the company that invented it. And fun fact, it is the husband of the granddaughter of one of the two Bommer brothers that currently is, runs the company today. Is ownership. I don't know that he has day-to-day, operational responsibilities in Bommer, but a fun fact, current ownership is basically family of the founders from, 15 years after the Civil War, basically, roughly. Any questions on the BB5000-450-600 or any other Bommer product, please feel free to reach out to us. And thank you.